Welcome to Outdoor Gear Chat, and we are recording here episode 50, and we're here talking about balance behind the scenes with Rab, and we are recording live from the Barrel House at Kendal Mountain Film Festival. I am your host. My name is Cathy KC. I'm co-owner and director of Hooked on Granite Limited, which nobody's ever heard of. You will know us more as the Climber Shop in Ambleside and the Joe Brown shops in Llanberis and Capel Curig. The business is owned by my husband and I, and we are standing on the shoulders of giants, the original owners of the shops that are just iconic. If you're in Snowdonia in the Lake District, then those are the shops you visit, and we're very grateful when you do. So we are a key supplier of Rab outdoor equipment, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome to the stage today Mr. Jon Frederick, who is Group Marketing Director for Rab and Low Alpine globally. So welcome, Jon.
Awesome. Thank you, Cathy.
So I know that this isn't your first KMF. Is it your first time on stage?
So this is my second KMF, first on stage. And yeah, so happy to be here. I think this festival has an amazing sense of community. And feel lucky to feel like a very small part of that this year. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's amazing. We've been coming for years and years, probably since it started, and it just does feel like we're coming back to see our mountain family, and we get to see our brands and our friends, so it's a fantastic event. Now, your accent isn't British.
Not fitting the room.
Do you want to tell us how you arrived in your role and made it across the pond?
Yeah, for sure. I think similar to you and probably a lot of people listening, this has been sort of my life drive and passion, first recreationally, and I think fortunately professionally as well. So I'm fortunate to have grown up, sort of aware of the hills, and in my young teens got into climbing, and it's a bit of a drug, so you just sort of, you don't look back. And since, when I was 18, my first job was working in a specialty retail shop on the bike side of things, and just really fell in love with sort of like the human element of the industry, and just the relationships and the communication, when someone goes to buy some kit, whether it's a kayak, a mountain bike, a trad rack, just the relationships you build. I just got hooked on that. And so I've been fortunate to work, on the retail side. I've worked as a sales rep, throughout the States. And then 11 years ago, started working for Rab in the States as the U.S. marketing manager, which was an amazing opportunity, just as a sort of a lesser-known brand in the States. And then, over the years, sort of took over managing the business there. And then a year and a half ago, moved my family to the Peak to sort of take over working on the global side of things, which is a fun sort of challenge. The brand has so much legacy and heritage in this country, and we also have some real sort of budding heritage in a lot of the markets we work in. And so some of this is a lot of like, don't screw it up, but also how do we bring passion that, our sort of colleagues in, the US or Canada or Norway have found in their, in the ski industry in North America or cycling in Canada, and sort of really look at how we sort of wrap that up into who Rab is globally. So that's a bit of the journey, but now I'm lucky to live here.
Awesome. Well, we're very pleased to have you. We're going to talk about the 2024 festival theme, which is balance, and thinking about balance as a verb, and maybe how we offset or compare the value of one thing over another. And I think these days value can really get mistranslated as just monetary, cheap, big value, fast, buy the best value, buy as cheap as you can. And value actually is a small word, but it's got a large number of meanings, and that it can be anything from how you regard something and how you hold it, its importance, worth, or usefulness. It can be principles of standards of behavior, judgment of what's important in life, or it can be something to consider, how important, beneficial something is or someone is. And so we're going to really kind of first off maybe think about the regard that we hold, the importance and the worth or usefulness of something. So I'm going to pose a thought. And do we as users have a piece of kit that stirs a memory every time we take it out on an adventure? And what was the first piece of Rab kit that you bought, and where did you buy it, and what kind of memories does it have, and do you still own it?
Yeah, I mean, kit, we call it like the stories and the seams, and I do love like different pieces of kit and what like the memories it brings back. For me, on the Rab side, we in the States, we didn't have the fortune of having Rab available since the early 80s. So for me, I think it would have probably been 2008, roughly, I bought my first Rab. It was called the Boreas, which we don't currently make. We do make a similar version, which I could definitely nerd out over what is different. Now it's called the Borealis, which I'm actually wearing today. And, it's funny from the value and balance side of things. At that time, my wife and I had just moved to Colorado, and I was definitely like, poor Kelly, because I was like, she moved for a job, and I moved to climb as much as humanly possible. And so I bought this piece because it was affordable. And it looked like that piece that would just work for everything. And it was, and it really turned into my second skin. And I know we were chatting last night, but it's that one piece that has gone with me, climbing in, Alaska at -30. I've also climbed in, plus 30 in Moab on a desert tower because it can shield the sun and the wind. It also is that perfect comfort layer that just helps shield between moisture and things in a big old insulation layer. So that has been that piece. And I do still own it. I own it in a few colors. It's funny though, because that one piece has tears and holes, and I've done everything. Like my heart would break a little bit if it ever went away, because the stories in it mean a lot.
Yeah, it's an amazing piece of kit, and funnily enough, this wasn't planned, by the way, but I'm wearing mine too, and it comes out with me on every single activity that I do, and it could be climbing, it could be paddling, it could be camping. It's just been camping and backpacking with me. In fact, even if I'm just getting on a plane, it comes with me because I turn it inside out, and it's this cozy little pillow for me to sleep on. So it literally comes everywhere. And that kind of multi-use, that's a real important value, isn't it? I mean, outdoor equipment is made to an incredible level, but it's not cheap. When you come into our shops, in particularly, we sell high-level product, and you can take a sharp in-breath when you see some of the price tags. But I do really want to talk about why that is, and that's all part of talking about the value. So first off, if you can buy a piece of kit that you can use for multi-different activities, that's already a winner. You're not needing to buy something for that, something for this. You can just buy that one piece. And I think if you can just keep it working for as long as possible, that keeps it out of landfill, and that's going to make sure that carbon footprint of that garment or product is as small as possible. And I know you guys have Rab Repair that absolutely offers some fantastic designs. On your stand, you've got some beautiful, almost pieces of art from the repair team. Yeah,
the repair side of things it's such an interesting... It's an interesting topic right now because it's become a bit of an industry buzzword. And I think sometimes buzzwords become obnoxious. I think it's a beautiful thing because it's taking something that has always been in the dirty back room, and now it's bringing it to the forefront and making consumers think about wow, I can repair this and I can keep it going. And for us, we have a lot of pride in that because it was sort of an intrinsic part of who Rab has always been. When Rab himself, was starting the company sort of without intending to start the company and started making sleeping bags for himself and his expeditions and his mates, the repair was essential because there wasn't just the pile of sleeping bags. If one got damaged on a trip and brought back, you wanted to repair it so it could go on the next trip because it maybe was made with a cool fabric that he got his hands on a certain amount of the yards of, and you couldn't make another one. And so that repair, again, it was, as I say, an absolute core of how we started. And, fast forward now, we do have our service centers. We have in Canada, US, Netherlands, and the UK. And I love the UK. We're still using sewing machines that Rab was using. And we still have individuals who are repairing the kit that we're repairing kit with Rab. And so I think that longevity and that pride is something that is just, it's our DNA. Yeah.
It's really important. Buy once, buy well. That's something that we pass on to all of our staff team, to all of our customers. And picking up on that heritage is really important because our Joe Brown shops turn 60 in a couple of years' time. Our Ambleside shop was 65 this year. So they're both specialist brand shops, and they have a long relationship with Rab, literally since day one. And Rab actually came out to one of our expedition events in February 2020 before the world went really weird. Yeah. It was so lovely to sort of chat with him. And he did a quote for us in our history that we have actually up on our website, and we did a podcast about it. But he explains in 1981, he and his wife Sue set up Rab, and a lot of their early contacts were through independent shops at the time, and all of those shops, or most of those shops, were run by climbers, and they were all his friends. So he'd go to them, and they're like, great, yeah, let's go climbing. Oh yeah, I'll buy some of your kit and stick it in my shop. But and that really gave him a toehold, getting Rab into the UK.
Yeah.
But with Joe Brown's, it was very different because the name over the door was Joe's, but the business was started by his wife Val. And so Rab explained, Joe was never seen at the trade shows. Instead, it was the formidable Val, she's just the most wonderful woman. So he had to deal with her and her team. And that meant that he couldn't sell into Joe Brown just because it was his mate's shop. He had to sell on merit, and that product had to stack up, and Val was very, very clear about that throughout her time and that she owned the shop. And then the same with the climber shop, because Frank Davies, the original owner, was kind of seen as the elder statesman. And so Rab never climbed with him. Never went to the pub with him. He did climb with Joe, but he had to get past Val. But so again, in the climber shop, he had to sell that product on its own merit. It had to stack up to the expeditions that those shops were supplying at the time. And it's a fascinating story through. But obviously, from those days in the 80s. The whole industry has gone through a sea change. And so, in a very brief way, can you explain how Rab has transformed as a company to become this global specialist in outdoor clothing and equipment, and really an industry leader in sustainability?
Yeah, I love that Rab quote, because I think in ways that he probably didn't imagine, and probably ways we didn't intend, pioneered through to our current ownership. And so, our current owner, Matt Gower, purchased the company from Rab, which was, is a British company, British distribution. And Matt had sort of created his own glove company called Outdoor Designs, which is probably familiar to some of you listening. And his view was really this opportunity of not global domination, but really, sort of what you say, what Rab was looking at was this product has these merits and we know it has this value, but Matt didn't have that, the climbing, the name, and so it had to be, how's this branding going to stack up? And so he actually, and I have so much respect for this, but he moved his family to the States.
Yeah.
And set up an office, set up a warehouse. It wasn't this, I read a news article just a few weeks ago about a brand trying to open up in the U.S. market. And it was, we're going to open up a website and we're going to sell direct. And it was sort of, I think, the MO these days. But this was the opposite. This was relationships. So it was move the family out there, invest in the market, hire some local people, and then put garment bags in the back of your car and drive around to shops and meet people. And it was, Vinny at the Mountaineer in upstate New York and the Adirondacks. It was, Gary Neptune and Neptune Mountaineering in Boulder. And it was these things of, it wasn't, they're not going to buy kit from Matt. They wouldn't even buy kit from Rab for who Rab was. It was the kit had to stack up from a value proposition because their stores are full of kit. And so it was really beating the streets and talking about tech and the real nerdy stuff of the grams per square meter of the fabric and the fill weight and, how those things play together to make that perfect garment. So it really was, trying to identify problems, solve problems, and really just a true personal investment. So it really kicked off. It wasn't just North America, but it was relationships there, and same thing. So it was looking at Norway, looking at the Netherlands, and looking at those things as these hubs where it wasn't, let's just hope that if we invest, it'll work, but it was actually let's get employees that work for us that sort of believe in the brand and believe in our values, and then, work with the local communities. And so sort of fast forward to today, it sort of gives me the opportunity to be out here and sort of have this real global brand, which, you mentioned the, sustainability side. That's its own other story, which we'll get into a little bit. But, that's a fun, not ever from day one, like we are going to be a leader in this. It was just sort of doing the right thing as far as like the best down is the most sustainable down. Like if you cut a corner to try to make something cheaper, it's not going to be a good kit for us. It's not going to work for you at your shop, but it's also not going to be as sustainable. And so all those little cornerstones built into a brand that will have global appeal.
Yeah, it is. And I guess the balance of all of that growth and sustainability is a continual challenge as well, because that value of that product, if you like, there's a passion in there from the designer, there's a passion in there from the creator, but also there's Rab as a company's principles of making sure that those garments are made. They can't be made in the attic in Sheffield any longer. So they are made in factories all over the world. Mm-hmm. But how are Rab managing or ensuring that the people that are making those garments in those factories around the world, there's a value in their job and their role as well, and within their communities? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to relationships again and that personal investment. And so, I mean, it is the backbreaking and quite often the thankless work, but and you back to sort of Matt and how he built the company up was, not, there's so many ways, and it's easier now, maybe not so easy 20 years ago, but where you can a factory can sort of make anything for you, you can just call it up, they can take this fabric, that zipper, put your logo on it and move on. But then you have no control over, the quality of the product or the, working conditions, the realities of how the energy is being made, et cetera. And so that was just a simple time commitment of probably an embarrassing amount of round-the-world trips by Matt and just investing his life into being in factories, setting up relationships that were long-standing. And so, definitely we have pride in the longevity of the relationships and sort of what that means. And it's also enabled us over the years when these like really valuable governing bodies like Fair Wear is one, that when they come on the scene as, sort of, audits and, how, sort of, whether it's, pay or working conditions, et cetera, that when we engage them, because we've been doing it for so long, we tick the boxes right away. Yeah. But it's not without challenge, and we have a nugget, and I think I mentioned this last night. You have these challenges that can turn into opportunities, and we have, and it's relationships pull it together. But we had a factory. This is very like sort of here and now, making a new sort of collection, if you will, for summer 25. And it's a factory we've worked with for a long time, really good relationship, and just unfortunate reality, the factory burned down just due to proximity to another building with another fire. And in the modern era of business, the pragmatic and the easy solution would have been to move production, hit timelines, and move on. And that situation, luckily it's a great factory relationship. We're the predominant sort of brand they work with, had good insurance, but there's a long lead there. So we were able to sort of extend financial support to help buy new machines, get stuff off the ground. And then we also reached out to our retailer partners and said, hey, these products that you've ordered to deliver on this date, they are going to be late.
Yeah.
And here is why. And like, we need to support this individual because he has employees. We need to support that, and we need your support to do that. So it's really pulling together. It's a little cliche, but the family, if you will,
Yes.
of, our retail partners, our factory partners, to say like, we can do the right thing if we work together.
Yeah.
And so there's just a lot of that. And so it is complex, but Matt is still in factory multiple times a year. And that's really uncommon in this day and age, that the owner is the one in the factories making sure those relationships are good. And sometimes you have to close a factory that you don't want to, but just if they're not going to do the right thing. So yeah, that real checks and balances has been big for us.
That's great, because it is something that's entirely invisible in that garment. When you go into a shop and you see that jacket hanging up. Maybe there is a Fairwear logo, and maybe there's all sorts of sustainability logos, and it's easy to see those and think, oh, okay. But what actually that translates into real life is exactly what you've just explained, and that is not something, that value is not there in a fast fashion garment, for example.
No.
And so, yeah, that's a fascinating example of just what does go on behind the scenes, and why our industry is different. From
exactly.
Fashion. It's not just the fact that technical clothing has to be built to a level to help us survive in extremes of weather that we shouldn't be able to survive in as humans.
Yeah.
But so it does need to be bought differently than fashion clothing, and for us as retailers, that can be a little frustrating when people come in and say, "I just want the blue one," but you don't want to know how waterproof it is.
Yeah, no, it's true, and you say that bought differently is. And we share the pain on that together, but the lead times to do it right. And we were talking is like, if we want to engineer something that performs better,
yes,
but also doesn't have a compromise of harming the environment, and can be repairable. That is, we develop fabrics with our partners from the mill level.
Yeah.
So you have to have your 1 to 2 year lead time on building the fabric to then decide how it's going to live in a garment, to then we talk about it, and then it's another year before it lives in your shop. And so there is such an investment on all of our sides to do that. Yeah.
It's a huge lead time. But just picking up on just going back on that sustainability, environmental side again, we did a podcast number 47 on the massive changes that are happening right now in waterproof fabrics. And Debbie Reed joined us, who's head of corporate social responsibility at Rab, and did a fantastic job explaining why waterproof fabrics are changing, which is all for good reasons. It's all for very good environmental reasons. But we are going to discover that our waterproof jackets react differently to the colossal quantities of rain that are coming down on us today. But that gave us a really interesting insight. And then we were able to speak with fabric technologists from Mountain Equipment and really get a feel for what's involved in the changes of those fabrics from a scientific level. And then we followed that up with a chat with Grangers as a reproofing, and because we're all going to need to wash and reproof our garments much more frequently. And so that really, that was a fascinating insight, and we're really grateful to Debbie for taking the time with us. And I know that was actually all shared with Rab on your internal mail, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was. We were so thankful that Debbie could be on that, because it's that topic no one wants to talk about.
Yeah, I know.
We need to do this as an industry because it's the right thing to do, getting rid of forever chemicals. But there's this challenging knockoff of your garment's not going to perform as it used to. And so, being able to, chat with you on this podcast, and, we're all trying to tell that same story. Wash your jacket.
So just pick up on balance again, and think about value and the principles or standards of behavior and one's judgment of what's important in life. Now, we've just touched on some really important examples of that, but I think I'm just going to pose another thought and ask, do people take environmental and social impact into consideration when buying kit? Because we're kind of bombarded with, you should do this, you should do that, you should think about this, you should think about that. I was like, I just want to go for a walk. I just want to be dry when I go for a walk. I just want a comfy pack when I go for a walk. So maybe if you can explain for us, you just sort of touched on the timeline, and there's a vast timeline involved in how that garment gets from concept, goes through design, gets into production, gets packaged up and shipped to us for us to unpack it and put it on a hanger in our shops.
Yeah.
Can you give us a potted idea of kind of what's involved?
How that works. Yeah, totally. And so I think, and there's so many different ways of sort of doing that. For us, it comes from, it is problem solving at its sort of simplest form of, and it's who are we solving a problem for? And so I think, probably oversimplifying it, but I think you probably either have a consumer problem, a retailer problem, or a brand problem. And the consumer problem, could be like, we want a warmer jacket that's lighter weight, that packs smaller, et cetera. We want a waterproof jacket that's also warm, so that could be an angle. There's the retailer angle of, we like this product's perfect, but because of the impacts of fast fashion and all these things and people being able to buy, a sort of a look-alike that doesn't perform the same, maybe we're solving a problem with our retailer of, can we make that a little bit more affordable, or can we make it with a slightly less crunchy fabric, et cetera. Yeah. And then we have the brand problem, and it's not always problems, but for us, it's a lot of innovation. Like we pride ourselves in sort of trying to solve the problems of that sort of pinnacle athlete. And we do get a lot from the consumer of like, I'm not going to the Himalayas. But the reality is, if you get a jacket that performs in the Himalayas, it's going to work really well when you're walking down the street in the rain. And so we, from very start, we look at that problem solving, and that typically, if you rewind the clock from when can I buy that garment, like the absolute quickest it can happen is really about 3 years. Yeah. It can be quicker, but then you're shortcutting something. Right. So it's really 3 to 5 years. And from then, we have this fantastic, our product team, which includes product managers, and they spend a lot of time looking at like what exists out there, what do we do, how can we sort of solve those problems, and then depending on equipment versus garment, we just start sewing and patterning, and it's fantastic. And these are the things you always want everyone to get a chance to see. But with like a backpack, you literally start with a paper model that you tape up for like shape and everything, because these are things mediums you can work and you can create these models. Garments, it's literally just sewing things up. Yes, we work on computers, but a lot of this is just actually proving it. And then we get there is the fun of the testing, and that's working, sometimes with the retail staff. We have this fantastic partner, Glenmore Lodge up in Scotland. We work with their guides a lot. Then we also have, athletes and staff in-house where we get to use stuff and try stuff. And actually Glenmore's, there's a fun one there. We have a pack, and this is a snippet of the timeline, is we have a backpack that is due to hit retail stores, I guess what would be next winter. And we last winter had prototypes, different sort of version 1, 2, 3 on the guides. Because if you want to beat something up, put it on a guide, because they're just on the hill all day long.
And in Glenmore Lodge, because the weather's...
And in Glenmore, because the cairngorms, it's just nasty. But that gives us a chance they can take it out, beat it up, and they find these little sort of wear points and challenges, and then they send it back, and we can tweak it and send it back out. And so, you build that timeline, and you sort of build in that durability. And then through to, as it's going on, sort of the last 2 years, that's when we're looking at, packaging and tagging and all that. And little things of like, how can we reduce the amount of packaging, limit the amount of pack size? So it's like, how many can you put in a box so you're sending less boxes, less fuel on a freighter, et cetera. All those considerations go into that timeline, yeah.
Well, I'm really pleased you picked up on the packaging one, actually, because the bane of my life, I don't always get to work on the shop floor very often, because I work a lot on the marketing side of things, the HR side of things, so I'm behind the scenes quite often. So when I do work on the shop floor, which I love, because you always get to talk to people that are going away and doing cool stuff, I can't always remember which particular garment does what and what fabric does this. So I rely on just like normally unzipping the jacket and running the customer literally through. It's got 2 arms, there's a hood, there's some pit zips. But traditionally there was a huge amount of tags talking about the different fabrics, the different insulations, everything. So that was my go-to for information on how I could talk about the garment with the customer comfortably.
Yeah.
Our staff don't have this problem because they're on the shop floor the whole time, and they get to go through all of the rep training. So all of a sudden, overnight, the Rab garments came through with just one paper tag and a QR code.
Yeah.
And I'm down on the shop floor, and I'm like, oh, no. Okay. Right. How do I work this? So I came back to your team and said, where's all the information gone? You know, it's really helpful to have all that information. And they explained that they'd done some maths on it and worked out that they could reduce their paper usage by the cubic square meterage of an Olympic swimming pool per year, basically, by just reducing this tagging and going down to one. I was like, oh, okay, I can't really complain about that. I'm just going to have to really up my game, aren't I?
Yeah, it's these never-ending just challenges of you don't want to shortchange the retail staff, you don't want to shortchange the customer in their sort of experience, but you need to take those things into consideration. And there's lessons to be learned by us in those. And so it's funny, we have this like journey that keeps going. And tagging, we're actually finding a way for how we can, because you still have what we call our ingredient brand tags. So that's your Gore-Tex tag, your Pertex tag, you know, because they have their own value that they, you know, of why a Pertex fabric is more valuable than a X brand, and it exists, but without being able to read it. And so what we're actually doing is sort of a combined storytelling. So increasing a little bit of the storytelling on our own tags, but reducing the amount of their tags for the same output, but a better experience. So if you don't always have to get your phone out with the QR code.
That's really good.
Yeah, but then, you know, plastic's a big one. We haven't talked about this, but you would have seen it. You know, plastics, this impossible reality of, you know, we'd love it to go away, but it's also a sort of this perfect material if we can deal with the end of life. And we had this, there's this sort of big project we worked on with plastic in the supply chain. And there's this dream to just get rid of plastic, the poly bags, right? You order a product, it comes to the retail store, or if you do order it, you know, from your retailer online, it comes in a plastic bag. And you can't recycle that plastic bag at your house typically, which is quite a pain. But the challenge is, if you take that plastic out of the supply chain, you actually have a significant increase in the product that has to get destroyed because of it gets destroyed. And plastic, nylon, polyester, even if it's recycled, has plastic in it. And so we've reduced the size of our poly bags, but if you get rid of poly bags, you actually introduce more plastic into landfills. So it's this crazy paradox. We have a cool scheme in the UK. We actually have, we collect poly bags. We strip all the poly bags off of any garments that we send out to consumers, and we turn those back into chips and make our own poly bags out of recycled poly bags. So we find these like small wins to try to, you got to inch towards success. You can't just be huge dramatic changes.
Yeah, I mean, it is deeply frustrating when, it's very exciting when you open a box because it's like, the Rab delivery is here. And then it's like, oh God, it is literally individually polybagged, which is so frustrating. We actually keep a lot of those within the business because we use them to stuff our rucksacks on display.
Yeah,
and because they're ideal. They make the fantastic. There's nothing better actually.
Yeah.
They make a beautiful, smooth rucksack display, which is actually quite an art form.
Yeah.
Packing a rucksack. So we do try and make sure we keep as much of that in the business as we can, but we do get to a point where it then has to either come back to yourselves. We try very hard not to put it into our general recycling, but it's a constant struggle to look for ways to use that. But I think the other important thing is part of the reason that we started these podcasts was to help people understand just what is involved in outdoor garments and look at using them for as long as possible, keeping them out of landfill, but also the kind of responsibility of buying once, buying well, but also buying the right thing. Make sure it's the right fit. Make sure it is actually definitely the right thing that you want. And coming into the shops, talking with retailers, it's becoming increasingly more difficult because we're a dying breed, the specialist retailer, unfortunately. But we do have a huge amount of skill, and we don't want you to go out the shop with the wrong thing. We want you to go out with something that fits, that you're going to love, that you're going to tell your mates about, and not have blisters, not get cold. You know, we've all been there. We absolutely don't want that for our customers. But when you're buying something as well, if you're buying online, and you can't physically try it on. We see a lot of orders going out where it's 3 of the same boot, 3 of the same jacket, and people are ordering 3, trying one on at home and sending 2 back, which is great. You're going to get the right fit, which is in some cases critical, particularly if you're going on an expedition. But the wastage in that additional travel of that garment, the additional packaging of that garment, it comes back into us, and we then have to process it and put it back out on sale. There's a huge wastage there, and that can be just nipped in the bud by just calling us or emailing and getting the correct advice, and we can help with fit. We can explain how that particular item's gonna work. So there's kind of a sustainability burden on all of us, and it does feel like it's huge, but if we just do those, like exactly as you said, those marginal gains, it can really add up and make a really big difference. And we've got thinking about just pulling that back to value, actually, and how something can be important and beneficial, not just to us going out and enjoying ourselves or staying dry, but to the environment. I'm going to sort of pose another thought, and if you have bought a piece of kit, you've used it, you've loved it, it's lasted a long time, you've got loads of memories with it, would you just go out and buy exactly the same? Or do you go to the shop and realize, oh, it's no longer made because it's a different size or shape? But buying technical clothing, as we've said, is very different to buying an item of fashion clothing, because it does absolutely need to be fit for purpose. How does Rab ensure that it's fit for purpose? You've explained a little bit. You work with sponsored athletes and you work with Glenmore Lodge and testing it out in the environment. But how do you match technologies of fabrics and insulations with garment design? It goes right back to that very start, that very beginning when you all sit down in the meeting and it's like, I know, let's make another jacket.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah, I think some of it is not being restless and not just doing something because you can. And I think that's a trap that we all can fall into, and I'm not going to say we've never done that. But it is, again, defining like what problem are we trying to solve here. It's not just making something new because we can just change something a little bit. And so it can come from innovation, and that's something we're always working on, is how can you make, it's the dream, right? It is how can you make waterproofs more breathable? How can you make insulation warmer, lighter, and more packable? And some of it is just really looking at that. And I think, a big element is the consumer element, is really understanding what they care about and what they value, which changes from generation to generation.
Yeah.
And you alluded to this earlier. We're all being told that the new generations are really purchasing on, sustainability that matters. I think, we're not seeing the wave of that yet, but we're all making them, trying to make products in that regard that have like a stronger end of life solution, or can just, how much repairability exists. But yeah, it really is back to that problem solving of saying it's not just restless, let's just do it because we can, but like how can we actually solve a problem? And that's the fun thing about the relationships with the specialty retailer, is you all are the eyes and the ears. You're with those consumers, and the fact that we get to sit down at least twice a year and, show next year's products, but talk about this year's products, what's working, what's not, what could be different, what could be better, and for us, that sort of, we always say the specialty retailer is the backbone of what we do. Like, we'd all be lost without it. Like, the consumer wouldn't have the education, as you talk about, the returns, the online shopping, like that, the wealth of knowledge from the specialty retailer is amazing for the consumer. It's also amazing for the brand, is we get that feedback, that sort of reverberation of here's what's working, here's what's not, how can we improve? And so it's really taking a lot of that and then, removing a big pride element of saying like, oh yeah, maybe we thought that was perfect, but it's obviously not. So how can we improve? Yeah.
Yeah, and I also want to really explain that Rab, you guys, I suppose the technical term is you buy from the mill. And what I mean by that is many years ago, before my husband and I had the retail shops, we had our own sales and marketing agency, and we actually manufactured our own climbing brand as well, Zero G. And as part of that, we went to a factory and to get the color that we wanted in the rope that we wanted, at the specification that we wanted, we had to buy rope by the kilometre, which is a major investment.
Yeah.
And the ropes have a life as well, so you have to sell those within a given lifespan. But that's a huge commitment. So I was just kind of working this or thinking this out in my mind. Let's just take our favourite jackets that we're both wearing, just by sheer coincidence, and I think the outer fabric is Pertex.
Yeah.
How do you buy Pertex by the kilometre? How does that work?
Yeah, so I mean, it's old school fabric. We buy it by the yard, and for some of being trying to be a responsible business is you find ways to have multi uses for a fabric. So a fabric that's a perfect outer for this lightweight garment could be a perfect inner for a different garment. And there are some fabrics that are bought in the millions of yards, which is significant. And you talk about the sort of expiration date on a rope. You obviously have your safety, UV exposure, all that. It's not a safety, with fabric, but you dye fabric to a color, and color has a human expiration date. If it's not gray, black, blue. That color can go in and out of trend, and if you're not really sort of very strategic and prudent with your fabric purchasing, you can have a lot of fabric that isn't on trend. And so there's a lot of sort of energy and effort that goes into that. But then back to the relationships, it is those relationships with the mills. We are incredibly proud of our partnership with Pertex. We do so much with them on the innovation side of how can we make these fabrics that just are really fit for purpose. And it is the fun stuff, but it's also that it's so abstract because you're working on a fabric for a garment you don't even know you're going to make. But those are fun projects. But it also is, if you are thinking about changing something in the future to solve a problem with the retailer or consumer, you then have to start thinking about, we're buying all this fabric with that mill. We have a partnership. We can't all of a sudden someday be like, hey, we're not going to buy that anymore. We need to change. You need years of planning to say, hey, we probably want to change this in the future. What could it be?
Right.
So so much as sort of navigating those relationships. But those are the fun parts, and those are the exciting ones, and really quite fruitful.
So, and this is just a nerdy question on my part because it just came into my head. So, for example, Pertex is obviously used in clothing, but it does suddenly we've got loads of this fabric left. We need to use it. Let's make gloves.
Great question.
Get used up.
Yeah, I mean, and fabric use-ups is a real thing for sure, and it can cross from one category to another. It just depends on the fabric and the weight and the breathability and the coating, etc. So I mean, the goal is there is nothing left. You're super dialed with your patterning and everything, so there is no excess. The excess exists, or the extra color can exist, and so that could be, a jacket could become a hut boot, or it could become a liner glove. It could be, packing cube. There's lots of things we can make it into. Or it can become creative solutions, with a one-off garment opportunity that, we work with a retailer on. So, you try to avoid those challenges, but they can become and the way you can extend that fabric life through the various garments, it's a fun challenge. It's not my challenge. The product team might not say it's a fun challenge. Yeah.
So we've also done podcasts over these Outdoor Gear Chat podcasts, episode 30 and episode 26. We spoke with two of the guides that you work with, Andy Cave and John Gupta, who both use Rab clothing and equipment in extreme environments and multiple attempts on sort of anything up to 8,000 meter peaks. Oh. I am just going to bring in at the end here, Rab started as a down specific or specialist company, and I visited the down room. I had a great day. And saw that the huge, great big blue bags of down that come in. Yeah. I know you guys are very passionate about where your down comes from. So can you just tell us about the RDS, what that means? And
So I mean, so down, I mean, just like so many. Well, it's a commodity. So, it is bought. It's a raw good, bought like a commodity. And there's such a wide spread of quality and where it comes from. And so the interesting thing with down, which is probably different than a lot of other things, is the better down does perform better.
Yes.
And so, European source down, it's goose down. It's a byproduct of the food industry. So those are and those are all. That's an always. It's always been that way for Rab. You can buy down in many other ways, and it gets nasty when you head down that path. It's something we'd never do. And so RDS is a fun one for us because RDS, which is a global certification for responsible down sourcing. That came onto the scene, and I should know off the top of my head the year, but sort of in recent era. And that was another fun one where we had been sourcing traceable European goose down forever in our world.
Yes.
And when RDS came on the scenes, we didn't have to change anything. It was a certification that you have to pay to be involved in these organizations, but it was just that we were already doing everything that existed, and so that to get again to the nerd level, that goose down, which is again sourced from the food industry, single. It's not. There's this sort of horrific practice, which unfortunately a lot of down comes from, which is live plucking, where you get multiple rounds of down from one bird.
No, it's horrendous.
It's not good down. A, it's horrible for the animal, but B, it's also not good down. And so this goose down, the plume is highly resilient. So stuffing, unstuffing. If you had bad behavior like we all do, where you leave your jacket stuffed in its stuff sack and you forget about it, that down will come back to life. So that like traceable European goose down is something that we use. And then in more recent years, the sort of changes, we've also introduced recycled down, which is a new interesting one because that is no longer traceable because it comes from wherever it comes from. It's not always necessarily goose down. It's still certified, it's cleaned, it has its own ratings, but that's a new type. But it's preventing it from going in the landfill, et cetera. But then back to communication. And we talked earlier about tagging. That's something we're real proud about. Whether it's it's on our website. I know it's a resource for all our retailers on their websites. Is we tell you exactly what fill power down is in there, how many grams of that fill power is in there. Like it sort of baffles us that you can't shop from most brands that way. And we think it's like, and again, we are nerds, but we think it's so important. Like if you compare jacket A to jacket B, knowing the grams of the fill power helps you know how warm it could be. And so, but then actually what type of down, what fill weight. So that's your sort of warmth to weight ratio, and then recycled versus RDS. So that all is just like as nerdy as you want to get. It's there for the reading.
Well, I love nerdy. These podcasts are all about getting super nerdy. But unfortunately, we don't have any more time today to deep dive into any more nerdiness. I would like to say a huge thank you to you, Jon, for joining us today. It's been absolutely super talking
thank you
with
so much. Yeah.
And a very big thank you to the Kendal Mountain Festival team, the KMF Tech team for all of their help, and also the Barrel House for providing such a great venue. And thank you very much to our live audience for joining us today as well. You can buy a large amount of the Rab range from our shops, which you can see online at www.climbers-shop.com. Or you can learn a lot more about the peripheral side of things. You can learn more about down, about the new waterproof changes, keeping warm, keeping dry in the outdoors, across all different activities at our website, the Joe Brown Outdoor Academy, and that is at www.joebrownoutdooracademy.com. And you can listen to more than 50 podcasts, including KMF special podlets, by searching Outdoor Gear Chat on your favorite podcast provider. Thank you.
Thank you.